I'm Jesse Lubinsky.
I'm Donnie Piercy.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Heil, hosts of the Partial Credit Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to another week of the High Tech Podcast. This is one of your two hosts, William Millingworth.
I'm the other one.
With Joshua Swartz.
Yeah. There we go. I should have waited a second. You were going to intro me, you know?
No. I was just going to say that we're both buttoned up this week. We actually have
we
collared.
Yeah.
All tidy.
Yeah. You got a very nice, black, slick look going on, man. You know?
Oh, the social is over there, by the way, on that side of the screen. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not on his wall, but yes, down. I think in my location, it's down that way. But yeah, you're looking slick. Yeah. You got like a Ted Lasso vibe going on, you know, like a Roy Kent black shirt vibe going on there, man. It's,
Roy wouldn't have these like polka dots in it, though.
Yeah,
Roy's would just be black.
He'd eventually have it. You know,
although there's one
moment get there.
Someone says, "Nice black shirt, Roy," and he goes, "It's heathered gray," which I love. You know, it's not black; it's heathered gray.
We should choose to do a podcast entirely in that voice someday. You know, like the Roy Kent you be Roy Kent, I'll be Batman. Like, or I guess I could do the Mickey thing. You be Roy, and I'll just be like, oh boy, you know, like, you know, just,
the entire time, every time you go to say something, it has to start with that specifically.
Like, welcome to the High Tech Podcast.
Oh boy. Thank you, folks, for joining us. I mean, we hope you are still here. Who knows after that? This evening, we're continuing the Ungrading series.
Yeah, we are.
We are specifically looking at the question that I'm bringing up on screen to look at.
I mean, I got it if you need it, you know.
No, I got it. You know,
you got it? Okay.
If anybody's watching the podcast, right, they can see that Will suddenly is talking and looks left and very far away from the camera.
It's a lot harder now that we're doing video to like stealth look at notes, you know.
Exactly.
It's
like before we could get away with it. Now you know. We're looking at the question tonight. How do I assess ungrading? Like, so we've already talked about it ourselves. We talked with Justin. We're really interested in this subject. We're trying to figure out like the philosophical, the technical stuff. Tonight is supposed to be focused on, or whenever you listen to this episode, Josh's favor. Whenever
I was letting it go. You know, I feel like it's not a hill I need to die on anymore. You know.
How do we actually assess this? Because yes, we're not going to have numbers involved, but we do need to give feedback. We do need to let the students know how they're doing, and that does really play into this. And we're going to have join us Dr. Timothy Shea, a faculty member at Josh's current institution, and we're pretty excited to have him along because we've heard about this from. I know that he's been in alternate grading schemes for like 10 years. My wife actually took a class from him before he went to work at Josh's place, before he suddenly went off to Africa. I mean, there's a lot of befores in there.
He's lived a life. We're
gonna have to ask him about that.
Yeah. He has a lot of experience. My experience with him is just that we've had to check his course, and I know that it's set up for ungrading.
So that's how you figured out how to do it.
Yeah, and now Tim and I have talked a bit more and connected over technology. He's teaching an instructional technology course right now, so
awesome.
He's been in our office a handful of times asking questions, and apparently having our podcast listened to in his class. So
he's even invited us to come speak at it, which is terrifying.
We're gonna be there in a couple weeks. We should probably start thinking about what we're doing for that.
Maybe we should talk to him about it.
That's a separate note.
Anyways, folks, not too much of ado here, right? We haven't actually recorded with him yet. This is one of those few times where we don't know what's coming. So we hope that you'll enjoy this conversation with Dr. Shea as we dig into the question: how do we assess ungrading? Anything else, Josh? I think we're pretty prepped.
No, I think we're great. I think we are ready for the Shea.
Let's No, you got to say that to his face now. You got to say that to his
I
face.
haven't called him that ever. That's literally the first time I've ever said that. So, and I'm not going to call it to his face because I hope he listens to this and hears it at this exact moment. That's what I'm hoping for. Okay, Perfect. So we're all in on a joke now. We'll see if Dr. Shea gets there with us. So.
We hope you're laughing, Tim. All right, let's turn it over and we will get into the conversation.
As promised, we are here with the, as I called him, I promised I wasn't going to say this, but that's the only thing that fits into my intro right now. As I called him earlier, the Shea. I've never called that to your face or behind your back either. I literally just said it for the first time in the intro to this episode. So we are here with Dr. Tim Shea, a coworker of mine, but also connections to Will. Ironically, I feel like I can't meet anybody who doesn't have a connection to Will. But we're super excited to have Dr. Tim Shea joining us today. What's up, Tim?
Hey, I'm ready for March.
Oh, there you go. Are you a basketball guy?
I am. My team is strong. I'm hopeful this year.
Okay.
2 years ago, they won it all. 2 years ago. So
who's your team? Okay. Who's your team?
UVA.
University of Virginia.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that because I don't know what that means.
Josh and I know. I really. It was a stretch. I was like, March, Ides of March. Tax season's coming soon. Basketball. That was the third thing that came to mind. I figured that might be relevant.
And I'm not normally into all kinds of sports, but when I was at UVA, I lived right across the street from the basketball stadium. Could walk across.
Okay.
For free games, and we tied for the championship the year I was there. I still remember playing against Duke and beating Duke in overtime and being deaf for a week, but it was wonderful. Being part of that kind of great basketball, but great ball playing.
It is about the energy, right? Like I was at a Philadelphia Phillies World Series game, and like you said, just deaf for a week because it was so loud. There's so much energy. I love that stuff. But Josh and I are not sports guys, so that's
yeah. Considering my wife and I just call it all sports ball, I'm not the best person to have sports chats with. So much to my father's dismay.
Yeah, the only things I do are March Madness and World Cup. Those are my two things.
Okay.
And then I just watch from the sidelines.
Okay.
So the real football.
Yes. Well, my wife is
not
British.
Soccer.
And I lived abroad, so that's always been the football of choice anywhere I've lived.
Yep. Who's your team there? That's probably more important. I might care about this.
Who my team is?
Yeah.
Manchester City.
Oh.
It's because my wife's from Manchester.
Okay. Now, I don't know this. Why would you end up being Man City versus Man U? Or are they the same? They're different.
Yeah, no, they're different. Man City tends to be locals. Man U tends to be not locals. I learned that. But the only professional game I've seen live is Man U versus the Bolton Wanderers at Old Trafford. That was pretty amazing.
It was more just to have the experience and be in the real stadium. Most important question for me, though, about this is, have you watched Ted Lasso?
Yes. I love Ted Lasso.
Oh, he just became Will's favorite person right now. That's Will has seen season 1 of Ted Lasso more than I breathed today.
10 times.
Season 1's top notch. It is.
We're at 10 times. I've watched season 1 10 times.
Wow.
I'm looking at my calendar this very moment, Tim, and across the entire March 15th day, which is the launch of season 3, it is marked Ted Lasso. My entire calendar says Ted Lasso on March 15th.
See, that's why you should be celebrating March.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a good way to return from the Ides of March, though. We're getting Ted Lasso instead of a knife in the back.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't. I love it. We'll just have to do a Ted Lasso episode sometime.
Yeah, we have to figure out how to connect it to education, and that'll be our episode.
Oh, I can.
Oh yeah, we'll work on it. It'll be fine.
It'll be
the Ted Lasso series. We'll rope them in. Okay. That's
The lasso to rope joke.
I know. See, I nailed it. To the real topic that we're here to talk about, right? Ungrading. Tim, I'm super excited you were one of the people who came to my mind when Will and I have been talking about this for like a year, doing an ungrading series. Mainly because Justin, I think, has brought me over the line a bit in the ungrading world. I was originally the skeptical LMS admin of ungrading, and then have slowly been brought over as been able to talk more education stuff with Justin about it. But I know that this is an area that you've experienced in, specifically in past, but also I know you've done, I think, do you have any courses currently that you consider you're doing ungrading in right now?
I would say all my courses I do ungrading.
Okay.
Wow.
Yes. Much to your chagrin, my friends that, you look at my syllabi. I remember the first time I had to sit and submit all that stuff, and you're like, we don't know how to put this in Canvas. I'm like, well, then don't,
Now I will defend that for a second. Their manager knows how to put it into Canvas, but I've had to have some conversations with our my people I supervise on how to carefully review ungrading courses. But yes, you're correct. It is
not
a
easy
confusing thing to put it in there, which is why Will and I had a dedicated episode to how to put it into your LMS, which actually pops up before this one. So
before the podcast ran tonight, my wife actually stepped in and said hi because she had a class from Tim 9 years ago, maybe, or 10 years ago, at a different university. And that was a course that you were teaching in a contract style. She told me about that. I remember that being my first introduction to contract style course where the students say, I'm going to get an A, B, C, D, and they commit to certain requirements. Would you say that that's the beginning or the genesis of your foray into ungrading? Were you doing it before that? Like, where did you pick up the ungrading methodology?
I would say in grad school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was doing it. The professors at UVA that's how we were evaluated. And in fact, there were some classes, they said, you decide, you assign your grade, and tell me why. And then when I started teaching and first foray into higher ed, I was doing a lot of writing classes, and my teaching partner, who actually was my professor, because I had done my master's at the school that I first taught at, she used ungrading and contract, and I really so I had taken courses with her, and I really learned a lot, and I liked it. So writing and education, I think, do well in ungrading because they're competency based, and proficiency. And so that lends itself very well to those conversations that go beyond a letter and a number, which I say are arbitrary and artificial, to meaningful and deep learning. And that's the difference. So you can do one. Yeah.
I don't need to date you. Feel free to answer this however you want to, but I have been hearing about ungrading for 5 years, maybe 10 years. Like, what's your interaction with it? Are you talking quite some time?
Well, yeah. So that would have been, I started grad school in 2005, started at my first institution 2008. Wow. I have been actively ungrading in that system since 2008.
Wow.
So about 15 years. Okay.
Here I think it's a Twitter fad, and it's something like, just recent, but that's great.
Yeah. Tim's like, welcome to the club, everybody. I've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And that's what I was told that I've been doing professional development for a school that I started at, and the guy who was my co-teacher is now the principal. So he brings me in, he says, Dr. Shea has been has been ahead of the curve. And, so things that we did together then became the big thing 10 years later. And so I didn't know that. I just sort of.
You were just teaching.
Well, and when I'm in the middle of grad school where you're in the midst of, relevant research, you latch onto it, and you know what works, and you know how the brain works, and know how education that's what you breathe, live and breathe.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, one of my mentors at I don't know how much you know some of the ed folks, but Carol Ann Tomlinson, who is the big name in differentiated instruction for like gazillion years. My wife, who was trained in Britain, they had to read all her stuff too. Like, so I'm in that world too. Like, so it's a sort of, yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
It was a good space for that.
A deep pedigree, if you will. Like you've got a lot of different opportunities there, but even to have that connection across with your wife to the international context, like that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. I taught abroad in 3 other countries and in an international context with educators from around the world who are grappling with educational issues in different ways in different spaces.
Yeah.
And I just felt that was such an important professional development for me too, to ask, well, why do we do it this way? Are there other ways? Is this just an American? And I would say Americans are certainly more obsessed with grades than other countries.
Yeah.
Now other countries do much more with testing, but they they don't grade in the same way. They don't. My wife still asks questions about like, well, why do you do it this way? Why is everything based on a grade and not other things? So,
do you find in that experience then that there's less resistance internationally to ungrading, or more because it's just so like, why would you need to do it that way or bring that methodology into it?
There can be more because there are parents who send their kids to international school, particularly if my last school was in Kenya. They're African parents that want their kid to go to Harvard, let's say. And they buy into the notion that the only way for them to do that is to have traditional grades, have a certain GPA, and do all the standardized tests and all that stuff. So, and they're staking so much on it. They've invested so much more than, let's say, a public education would, or even private school here. It's considerably more.
Right.
I've had to sell it
can change their lives.
Than higher ed, certainly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
The key for me is when students and parents see the depth of learning, but that can take time. Learning doesn't happen overnight, but when they see that, they're more willing to take those risks with it.
Yeah.
Hey, now that we did that, that seemed fun. A little Avengers style blipping.
Mr. Stark, I don't feel so well.
Don't do that. That's mean. that just all of a sudden starts to bring up the tears. No, I'm gonna jump in. I remember what I think I was about to say, which is Tim, what I find interesting about the ungrading topic that's really brought me over the edge, and this was involved with some conversation with Justin and I think Will and a couple other people, is the fact that, like, really at the end of the day, to your point, some of the grades and letters we're giving become this kind of like artificial statement for what learning is, but it's not really learning. So to your point of just like, once people actually see the depth of learning, how that starts to bring them around the edge to this ungrading idea, I think it's just very interesting. It's become kind of this artificial label we give to learning in a way that doesn't really do a great job of representing that all the time. Would you kind of agree with that's kind of for you what's kind of brought you into a little bit of this and why you kind of push this direction?
Well, yes, and part of it is here I am preparing teachers and writers. That's what I would say are my two aspects of teaching that are my identities. I teach other things, but those two things are how I do my research. And both of them are competency. And I remember thinking, I got to give a letter to this rich thinking, there's all kinds of stuff happening, and because it's a competency, the initial pieces are rough and ragged, and yet we're expecting perfection if they're going to get the A. How silly is that? Like, when in life do we try something new and we nail it the first time? Unless you're Will, I don't know. It doesn't happen.
Come on now. Come on.
You're not wrong. I think if I've met a human being that sometimes nails things the first get-go,
Stop.
Although I will say steak cooking, not one of his strong suits originally.
Hey, I have one
Because your
scar.
steaks
I
were
only
bad
have one
because
scar.
you
I've
burned
cooked
your
many steaks.
it's a totally
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. We know from neuroscience that when we make mistakes, how our brains grow and the neurons. And so we know from brain research that we
Yeah.
need lots of mistakes to learn and grow. And yet we create this system where we minimize mistakes and try to make it all safe and easy, and everyone gets an A just by showing up. And then we wonder why we can't do stuff. More importantly, we wonder why we don't have our kids with grit and perseverance, because
Ooh.
all they have to do is show up and get a silly letter that means really nothing, but they think it means more than it does.
Yes.
preach it. There we go.
There's a
Get at
soundbite
it.
if I've ever heard one. No, I feel that. I see that in some of my like younger cousins, nieces, nephews. That like this. I'm not that old, but the people who are younger than me, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, can you like? I just did manual labor all weekend. I built some gardens. We hauled stuff. We shoveled dirt. Like I felt like good. I was using my muscles. I'm like, where the heck is the 16-year-old? Like I was wondering, like we have a 16-year-old cousin in this family. Like, where's he? Why isn't he out here shoveling stuff with us? Like if you even tried to ask him, he wouldn't be there. He would fight you tooth and nail to participate. And that's a big thing. Like you're saying about grit and resilience. Like when he talks about his grades, we were just talking to him last night. Oh, why haven't you done that assignment yet? His mom asks. It's only 10 points. I don't care. It's only 10 points. I don't care. That means all he's doing it for in the first place is the points.
Right?
He's never doing it to learn.
Right. And the crazy thing is, no one else will ask about grades beyond higher ed and K-12. No one's ever going to ask. And even higher ed, it's less and less. But it's they think it's it. It's not.
I have not been graded at my job, right? Like I deliver on my deliverables, and they either go back to the drawing board to be redrafted, or they're accepted and they move forwards.
Yeah.
There's no grading process.
My boss, the Tim knows, clearly just gives us grades every day. No, I'm just joking.
Do you grade your employees, Josh? Do you give them a grade in Notion?
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear how I do that. No, yeah, it becomes a different motivator. Like we were talking about that with Justin, that it ends up, we want the amount of times I hear teachers say, like, I don't want you to care about the grade. I want you to care about the feedback and the growth. And yet at the same time, then we turn around and go, here's your grade. Obviously they're going to start caring about that. I don't blame the students for that becoming some of the motivations that have driven them, is that because we kind of artificially place that there, right?
That at that level with our local students, and what you're speaking to before, Tim, about international students, their trajectory is it's survival. If they get the grades, they move through our system here. And if they get the grades, they think they can come and join the system and be a part of what that can mean for changing their opportunity gap and stuff like that. I mean, it's very important in the systems that exist. This is what gets me the best about ungrading. Like we all have to come over the line, as Josh is saying. I love burning systems down. And this to me feels like the gasoline on the fire. We just need a match here, and this could be a part of changing how we view education, because I got into what I do and why we even have this podcast, because I love this. I love what education can do to transform a mind and a heart. And when these grades, as an example, get in the way of that transformation, that's no good to me. I want to see that be changed. All right. Go ahead.
Well, are you familiar with flow theory? By Csikszentmihalyi, the idea of that deep learning, and that when we're in the flow, when we're in the midst of something we love, like we lose track of time, we lose track of everything around us. So learning something new, and it's all has to do with engagement and the way our brain works and the way the synapses are working when we're doing something we love and just immersed in it, a hobby, whatever it is. Well, schools don't allow for that. Like we don't have chances to pursue our passions and to really learn in ways that makes us excited and gets us up in the morning.
Yeah.
It's all, what's done to us and for an arbitrary system. And somehow we've got to change that. We've got to give space for kids exploring their passions. and going deep with it, because that's where they'll learn. It's like the advice I would give my high school students looking and choosing a major, or college students. Choose something you love, and then you'll do it so well, you'll learn the process, and then you'll have all kinds of opportunities, because you will become a better person as you learn and grow through what you love, not what you feel you have to do to get the 6 figures plus or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And I did some Googling on the side, because that's my millennial tendency. Flow theory, of course, like in the zone, the mindset of it.
Yeah.
But I was very thankful that as I typed some basic words, it gave me the name you said out loud, because I would never be able to pronounce Mihaly, Mihaly. Did you say that?
Csikszentmihalyi.
So it's first name's Mihaly, last name Csikszentmihalyi, spelled Czikszentmihalyi. That is beautiful. That's like up there with Justin. Justin will give us these names sometimes. I'm like, what? Who? Say that again. Spell that for me, please. That's up there now. It's one of my favorites. Thank you.
So
I love talking about flow theory.
That's a fantastic one, and I connect with that a lot with my martial arts. Like that's Tim, for my background, that's how I got into education in general and how I fell in love with it. I taught martial arts as like a 16, 17, 18-year-old. My master would let me co-teach and stuff, and I felt like that was a great space in informal education to connect with the student heart to heart, body to body, mind to mind, and transform them. And you can see, if a student couldn't do 10 push-ups and now they can do 20 push-ups, if a student was a white belt and now they're a green belt, there's very visible, tangible things that come in that learning process. I've always wanted that kind of authentic, if you will, even apprenticeship style learning to be a part of academics. I feel like it's really missing in academics. All that though plays into like what we're talking about here with ungrading. Like this is to set these students up to actually get these experiences in their classroom, as opposed to be marked against the system. The big question of the episode, Tim, since you've been doing this for a while, you've worked with Josh to figure out the Canvas stuff. We know that there's maybe not the letters involved, but what do you do to assess your learners? Because there is still some level of assessment, correct?
Yep, there is. And there's all kinds of, it depends on what the things are. So there are things I'll do every week. Let's say exit tickets or reflections that will be complete or incomplete. You've done it.
Okay.
You're part of the conversation. Not everything has to be graded. It's just, we've done it. We're part of it. Then I would say my major assignments, they did it. They met the requirements of that assignment. They exceeded them, or they didn't. They need to revise it. And if they get that mark, they can't pass the course until they have revised it till it's at least satisfactory. Wow. So they got to keep going back. And this goes with what I do is writing pedagogy. You become a better writer by deep revision, not writing the last minute, but draft after draft after draft. And then it gets, you refine it, and then you get it to where it needs to be. And, kids these days, all of us, we want instantaneous learning, and that's just not realistic, and it's not going to be quality. And there's where my students, when they realize, I can go back, I'm not penalized for going back, and I'm actually learning more because I've had to think to get an A. So then it feeds into my contract. So let's say there's 5 major assignments. To get an A, 4 of those 5 need to have reached the distinctive level, and they have all semester to keep revising that. To pass the class, everything has to be satisfactory. You met the basic requirements. So that's part of how I would do that. I also include, and I'm doing one the week we come back from spring break, midterm conferences with my students, and then final conferences. They write a letter to me assessing themselves, going through our SLOs. They talk about which ones they've met, which ones they haven't. So we use that as their assessment. So how are you reaching them? Tell me how you've learned. Give me evidence that you are reaching them. I also give them things like they have to show me evidence that they have evidence of excellence, growth, and risk taking. And to get an A, and to get an A in the class, they have to show evidence of all three. To get a B,
Wow.
show me evidence of 2, and a C, evidence of 1. So
Okay.
so that means to take a risk, it may flop the first time,
Yeah.
and everyone's risk will be different. So it's a differentiated risk. You choose your risk. Sometimes I include in the evaluation at the beginning of the course, they set goals for themselves. Midterm time, they tell me how they're doing with their goals and what they need to tweak, and then at the end, that's part of the assessment too. And then they submit it all in a digital portfolio where they have it against a letter. They use evidence to support what grade they earned. We talk about it, so it's personal. That's the other thing. Grades are so impersonal, and they ruin my relationship with students. And we argue over silly things like a 0.5%. Like, who cares? Who cares?
Well, and to that point, do you do pluses and minuses, or do you just do letters?
I could do pluses and minuses. So
Okay,
let's
so you
say the contract calls for an A, and they basically, but they missed some assignments. They said, well, let's talk about it. That doesn't seem like a full-fledged A, but it's not quite a B. So it may be an A minus or B plus. Let's talk about it.
Okay.
And you negotiate that with them.
Yeah.
You take that time with them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. But they're empowered.
Do you guys think that y'all still offer the alumni discount or whatever? I'm ready to come back and take a class from Tim. I would love to learn in that environment because you're challenging them to think the whole way through. Not only about the subject matter. If you're, I don't know, Tim, but if you're talking media literacy, or if you're talking writing, pedagogy, or you got them focused on the matter, but like they have to now take on executive function and be like, no, you're right. I didn't meet that. I think I'm not a B. I really hope, Professor Shea, I'm not a B, but I know you're right. I didn't meet the A. And now they're involved in that conversation with you about the A minus, as opposed to be like, well, my wife once threw a fit about getting her only A minus in her entire career because she was so, whatever happened that semester. And she told this faculty member about it 6 months later. And the faculty member was like, if you would have told me, I would have just given you the A. It's like those moments where we don't know we can advocate for ourselves, but you're bringing those students actively into that conversation so they can.
Right. Now, truth be told, they don't know how to. And they also, some of them really stress out because they don't know what their number is all the way through. And I'm like, but you know what you're learning, and you know what you need. And some things, because they're a process, you got to trust me that we got to build on that product, whatever that is, whether it's a unit plan, whether it's a case study, whether it's a work of writing,
Yeah.
Yep.
And build in with that some choice. So how are you going to show me that? Everyone may show me it a different way. Your risk may be different. Your excellence may be different. Right. And even the assignments will have choices. It could be a podcast for one, and a debate for another, or a longer paper for another. Okay. You have different ways to show me the same, as long as the objectives are met. The SLO, show me that you can, let's say my differentiation class, you got to show me you can differentiate instruction. So take a lesson plan and
write it for different modalities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Now I'm curious, Tim, how have you worked with the students? Because that's one of the things, as Will and I have been digging into this a bit, because we haven't pretended to be experts in ungrading. We were just like, we like this topic. We have a podcast. Welcome.
We're going to talk about it.
Want to listen to us. The thing I've noticed in feedback in a couple different places where instructors have wrestled with this or struggled is one that you just mentioned, which is kind of, you do this to help the student learn, but then you also have the added anxiety that the students start to have because it's a different system. How have you tried to wrestle through that with your students to kind of assuage some of the anxiety to get them to kind of focus on the right things? Does that make sense? Kind of how you've worked them through that process?
Yeah. Well, it's finding different ways to check in with them. Regularly doing exit tickets and free writes, and asking them to process it, and showing them. Like, one of the things I did with my writing students, I gave them some student writing samples where where they're learning assessment. How do we assess writing? And we tried different modes. I said, okay, let's just do what you may have grown up with, what I grew up with, just an arbitrary letter. Let's put a letter on that. No rubric, just put a letter. Now let's look at the piece again. Let's exchange papers, and now let's use a detailed rubric. Now let's do this system. Now, what was different from one to the other, and what kinds of information was gathered, and how were they beneficial or not? Like what didn't you know, and what did you learn? And to see that in front of me, like, wow, that some of these things just have so many limitations. I have a whole,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
I also have an aversion to rubrics. I think rubrics are evil in many ways, that they limit. They put in a box what doesn't need a box. Like, there are sometimes a paper can go through a rubric and get an A, and it's garbage.
Sure.
It's grammatically correct, but not creative, and it's not going to convince me to do anything. And
Wow.
vice versa. A really good paper, great ideas, but may have some conventional issues. It just needs a good editor. Could then,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
not. And so that's wrestling with what is good writing, what is good anything.
But I like what you're saying there. Like you're inviting them into the process and giving them a look behind the curtain. Like, well, this is what I would do. This is how it would be done. What do you think? How are you processing the impact of the
Yeah.
rubric or the not, the letter grade or the not? That like I'm hearing consistently, Tim, this invitation for the students to see your model, but also to experience the model. Like you are modeling the behavior, but you're letting them not only get the model, but investigate it and play with it
Yeah.
and poke at it, which is
Well, and it's how
really
I run
cool.
my pedagogy classes, where we'll do something, and then I'll do what I call a meta moment, a metacognitive. Why did I do this? How could you use this? Where would this be most effective?
Yep.
What kinds of things could you consider that to be aware of if you would implement it?
Yeah.
And I tell them, we're going to experiment. You won't know until you try a variety of ways of whatever, assessing, discussing, whatever, learning and growing together. And really, our classrooms all should be those kind of laboratories.
Oh yeah. I
And
love that language.
along with that, trying to get our students to teach. So if you're teaching history, how do we teach our students to be historians? If we're in math, how are they mathematicians? How are they writers? How are they, geographers? Like, so then we put in that professional piece. What do writers do? What do historians do? What do mathematicians do? What do scientists do? Well, they explore, they experiment, they inquire, they ask questions, and they throw out hypotheses and try another hypotheses.
And then they test, and if it
Yep.
works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And they do, they play.
Mhm.
And I wonder how many of our students associate learning with play. And yet, if you look at, and I know you guys look at video games and learning, look at, play and learning. And I've done some
Yep.
research on those, and it's all tied together. Like when we really are learning, we're playing, we're in the flow, there's a love of trying to make sense of it, of learning, and
Yeah.
make connections and go deeper. And I feel too often the grades inhibit that. Rubrics inhibit that.
Yeah. One of my friends is a respected and pretty well paid mechanical engineer. He lives and breathes inside of AutoCAD and all their professional software, but then gets in and builds the stuff once it's been designed. And one of the things we did the most growing up as friends was build stuff like trebuchets in his backyard to see how far we could throw the watermelon, right? Like he and I didn't play video games. I had other friends that have always been video gamers, but like I loved going over to his place. We once built an air cannon named Bertha, and we wanted to see what Bertha could destroy with a potato, right? Like those kinds of things. And like when we're doing it as kids, literally 16, 15, 8, 17, it's fun. And we're launching stuff in the fields. Nobody's getting hurt, nothing, but now he does that professionally, and he gets to do that where he's literally like making things for like pill bottles that the mechanical delivery has to deliver the pill with 0.00000% contaminants and all this kind of stuff, and he's got to figure out these big science questions from us blowing things up in the backyard. Like I love that, and I think that that's he got the better paying job out of the two of us. But I love that folks can have that in education, that we could get that, but too often it's not happening. And it's really sounding to me like this is my just brief meta moment on this episode. Ungrading, yes, has a direct impact on A, B, C, D, 100, 90, 80, whatever, but it's about your approach to teaching and learning. Like it's about what you bring to your students and what you want them to accomplish. I don't think I'm missing the mark there, but that's what I'm gathering from you, Tim. That's really
Yeah.
a beautiful thing.
Well, and when I incorporate, so I incorporate a variety of systems in this, and and it goes to what my thrust of design based learning. So how do I design, just like you, Josh? You guys design in our systems. For being in a classroom as a teacher, designing curriculum, how to design learning so we have deep learning across the gamut. So how part of it's how do I have students ask these questions, but also how do I help them to um, not be constrained by a system that they've been stuck in, and
Yeah.
and then part of it is too, like one of the things we hear a lot of critique against is grade inflation. So
Ooh.
so even holding them accountable. So because I have this revision system, you keep revising to get it. I'm going to make an A what it should be. It should be above and beyond, not just do the work, but do it well.
Yep.
If you just do the work, that's a B or a C. That's okay. And sometimes that's all we do. We just do the work. But you shouldn't get awarded this A plus for just showing up.
Right.
It should show, and that could be in different ways, but I should see some creativity. I had some students today, they got a satisfactory on a project and they want to bring it up to an A. I say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Um, what does it mean to be excellent? You met the requirements. I gave you some things that aren't quite where they need to be. But I may ask you to go a bit further with that. And some of them hate that open endedness because each one's a little different, but it has to be that way.
Yep.
Yep.
As I tell my writers, I say it should move me somehow. I should learn something. I should feel something. I should believe something because you've convinced me. Use words to do that. If it's just a very formulaic kind of response, why should I award an A to that?
That's
Yeah.
great.
So they have to mean something. It's not just give an A because they it's ungrading and everyone gets an A, which I've experienced too. Our brains are also wired that we learn when we're challenged, when we have something to reach for, and if all we do every time we just show up, we're just giving a pat on the back. Good job, you ate your breakfast today. Good job, you brushed your teeth. No, but good job. You went out of your way and helped your neighbor. You did something that may have been a bit
You
harder.
washed the car and you waxed it. Wow.
There you go. Yeah, and you vacuumed it for your wife.
Whew.
That's above.
I'll tell you,
and
that took me 4.5 hours one Saturday, and it was worth it. But it took 4.5 hours to do that. Holy smokes!
Took a while. I appreciate, Tim. I think that you're kind of grabbing onto and encompassing for me is I love this series because Will and I think I just keep having like aha moments about the ungrading concept
Every episode.
One for me is like just how much I think ungrading. One criticism I've heard is like, well, they need to be prepped for the real. I think we talked about this in our first episode, Will. They need to be like prepped for the real world, and but as we talk about this stuff, really ungrading is more actual preparatory for the real world, because at the end of the day, life is not a formulaic thing. Like there is vagueness sometimes to when we create something. There's unknowns when we're experimenting with ideas and embarking on those things, and that's the fun of life and the reality of life that we deal with. And so it's cool. It sounds like ungrading, really, at the end of the day, when done right, is creating this environment that encourages students to take those risks and put themselves out there and try to learn and keep reworking and revising and reshaping what they're doing. because of reality, that's what life really is like. It's not a formulaic thing where we get a grade that you've passed life, you're successful at this thing now, you've done this, you are always growing and learning. And I love that. I think Ungrading is kind of trying to provide this system for doing that a little bit better, where we're focusing more on what the person's doing, what their growth is, and not on the arbitrary grade we've thrown out to them at that moment.
Yeah, as I tell the student, let's say in my education classes, so you get an A, but if you can't teach, who cares what letter grade you got? You're not going to hold a job. If you can't write, it doesn't matter if you fudged away and got an A. What does that mean? That means nothing. And what good is that? You leave and you can't write. Why go to college if you can't communicate well? If you can't do what you thought you were training to do, you can't think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well said.
I love that.
Well, I appreciate it, Tim. We wish this is one of those months where Will and I wish we could go on for like 2 more hours, and we realized we should have done like a ungrading series that was basically
the Timothy Shea series of ungrading.
The Timothy Shea sponsored ungrading series. But love to have you back to talk more about this, because I think you're just such a wealth of knowledge around this topic, and I really appreciate your time with us and your feedback. Now, the one thing we got to transition a little bit here, Tim. The one thing I realized we didn't prep you very well in our notes, because Will and I don't do great at this, is we always ask our guests for a recommendation for an app. Now, I know that's probably not going to be hard for you, and more difficult to maybe pick the one you want to go with. But is there a ed tech app or an app that you're just really loving right now, that you'd like to kind of just promote and throw out as something that, hey, I've really dug this app right now, I'd love to talk about it a little bit?
Oh.
He did a really good job of just talking that one up to give you the time to think, so it's okay if you still need more time.
I know. The thing is, the way apps go, ones I really got into, then they put up a paywall, or they don't. They sort of don't get developed.
Story of education.
Oh. So I feel like I'm in this mixed middle ground, still trying to navigate it. I still, as messy as it is, this is not an app, but I find so many fun ways to use Twitter in the classroom that and I do like the idea of flipping the narrative of any kind of social media. Like, how do we use it in good, positive ways and create community? So I can't give you anything. I'm sorry.
Well, that's
I'm going to hold on to Twitter, though.
Yeah,
I like that.
We've talked about Twitter as an app, even though it's not like a traditional ed tech app. I think there's a lot of uses for it. And to your credit, like I know, because we follow you on Twitter, you've been using it in like your instructional tech class, right? You've been using it to post and create hashtags and get students to engage in that environment. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. And what I love is that, we will include, articles, and then they will repost and they will comment on the students, and I love that they can, and of course the students love that Barack Obama follows me on Twitter and has been for over a decade. He does. Yeah. So,
how? What?
I know.
Is it actually the former president, Barack Obama?
The blue check Barack Obama. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's only on Twitter, right? So my students will be doing a Twitter chat, and that's one of the requirements. And I love when they come back with this buzz, like all these famous people were chatting with me, or teachers, and they wanted to hear about what I had to say about stuff. And that's the beauty. I even do a whole series on hashtag research, and how you can use the hashtag to see two sides or multiple sides of an issue, and then get some arguments from that.
Yeah.
And enter conversations on that. Because good argument is acknowledging there's another perspective. Your argument may be stronger, but you've at least considered other perspectives on that argument.
Mm-hmm. Big point to empathy generation, and just being aware, social awareness of your people that are involved in the conversation. Yeah. I love Twitter for education. I love using it with conferences and following it for community building and stuff like that. So you've checked my box of interest. That'll be the app of this episode for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, it gets maligned, but and I understand the the reason why it does, but I do think.
And to your point, you could swap out Twitter for a number of the different
Yeah.
social medias. It doesn't have to be Twitter, but that's been it has a history in education of being used for that purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. And my students are all exploring Twitter alternatives to do what Twitter does, but in spaces like schools often don't let you use Twitter anyway, so there are other options certainly.
Yeah.
Um,
Wonderful.
Sure. Cool. Well, thank you, Tim. Again, we really appreciate you joining us, my friend. It has been a great time. I really appreciate it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hope we can do it again.
Yes,
absolutely.
Sir. We do a little bit of debrief momentarily, but we'll wrap this one up here, and then we'll do a little bit of debrief, just me and Josh. So just hold for a second.
Whoo! That was the Shea, folks.
The Shea.
That was the Shea. That's the new thing now. That's the name I'm just gonna say it to him as I walk by him in the hallway.
Hey, what's up, the Shea?
Unlike Will, we're and I'll just go the Shea, and that'll be what happens. Yeah, dang, that was like I said in our conversation with Tim, I had no idea the extensive background he had with ungrading. Like, you listeners are probably thinking, shouldn't have you thought of that as you ask someone to be on your episodes? And
listener, you're right.
But really, Will and I just threw a dart, and we're like, "Oh, here's a guy I know who does ungrading, and he seems cool." So yeah, right. No, like, man, he's got so much background with the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I knew, like I said, like, oh yeah, like 10 years ago, maybe some stuff. He's like, no, like the entire time I've been in this, I was trained in this.
Yeah.
Like, wow,
I've been doing this. Yeah, I didn't realize this was just like, to his point about his joke about the check thing, from our office, which Tim, great job fitting that in there. And what he doesn't know, what I tried to allude to, is he doesn't know, is there was an entire conversation with a team member afterwards about technically ungrading's not wrong, and here's how you do it in the LMS. I didn't realize he was doing it for like all his courses. Right. That part I didn't realize. I thought there was like a course he did it with. So anyway, I think just a couple things I takeaways for those listeners, hopefully listening at this point. Who knows where you're at? You might be in your car being like, I just, got angry at a guy on the road. I don't even know what you two are saying.
I just got shade, right? Like,
yeah, I got you. Oh, that was, I don't know how I feel about that phrase. We got to work that out. But we'll workshop it. Nailed it. Okay. But a couple takeaways. I think one, I really like the way Tim has it's clear we've joked about like contract courses can kind of fit into ungrading, and Tim's pretty much like, that's all I do.
Right.
It's like contract. So contract, I do think we can really solidly say is an ungrading model, but it's specifically the way Tim does it. I really like this idea of like, here's a handful of things you're working towards as a student, and then I'm going to have you submit them, and we're going to rework them. I'm going to give you a ton of feedback. And I love that he's practically evaluating risk.
Yeah.
Like, he's saying, like, how much risk did you take in the course?
Did you just like literally do the PowerPoint slide that got it done? Or did you decide to make like a 5-minute movie doing the same thing? That's a risky thing. If you're going to do a movie, you need actors, you need a script, you need scenes, you need cameras, you need editing. Like, the risk part is,
or like taking a risk with an idea, right? Like, I mean, you could write a paper that's kind of just the run of the mill, or if you really have an interesting thought that's kind of out there about something, you can take a risk with saying, I'm not sure how Dr. Shea is going to receive this, but I know that he appreciates me taking a risk,
trying
with ideas and what I'm doing, like, and trying. And that's what I really like. It's encouraging students to get out there and actually try to learn. And I think he said it well in that these grades often can get in the way of that. Like, I love that he said, like, they can ruin my relationship with students.
Oh, soundbite, baby.
Like, that's so good. Yeah. Oh, man. It's
academics,
so good.
The way to ruin relationship with students.
Yes. Give a D. No,
I liked, like a point that I made in the episode, but like really hearing from Tim, all the spaces in which he models the outcome. He models how he wants them to negotiate. He models how he wants them to communicate. He models how he wants them to do the work. He models how he wants them to work with each other. He models how, like, there's just something like about how he sets up the room, how he addresses the feedback, how, like, everything he was talking through, I'm just like, dang, this is teaching. Like, the teaching is modeling is teaching. And he's really got it nailed down. And that spoke to me in the space of, like, if we're gonna assess things, right? That's the point of this episode. We need to be ready to model good assessment, but invite students into the model, which is what he's doing. He's saying, like, hey, well, hey, you didn't like the A minus. Like, let's talk about it. Why? What could you have done differently? What could we still do? You know, because he's it seems like he's in that camp, like, it's not over till it's over. So try again. Do it differently.
Yeah. Well, and I think good takeaways when we're thinking about how do we assess and ungrading is, while Tim didn't say it this exact way, at the end of the day, he's setting standards for his students. He's pushing them towards those standards, and then is evolving the feedback and the things they need to do to reach those standards based on what the student does, not just based on a box that they created, to his point about rubrics or this evaluate, or this fictitious grade we've put around it, but really saying, okay, here's what you did, here's what didn't meet kind of my expectations, here's what did, here's what you could do better, and also then pushing them into an area where it's not perfectly just formulaic, like some of the stuff where, you know what, you need to motivate me in your writing, you know. Students could be like, well, what does that mean?
Make me feel something.
Well, you know what, I don't know what it means perfectly for you in this writing in this moment, because it's not a formula. It's about the way that you try to engage with the writing, right? And the what you do. So I think that's really cool that he's pushing them that direction. And then also, for those listening, pay attention to what he said about how to deal with anxiety with students. That's a big thing that we noticed in feedback from people who've talked about doing ungrading. Tim didn't make it some complicated situation. It's just as simple as creating avenues for communication with your students. Like, he's leveraging practices that a lot of teachers already do, like exit tickets and entrance tickets, and like he talked about doing different models of writing and changing up how kind of doing experiments with the students so they can kind of see how to do certain things. And like, he's opening up channels for communication, and like you said, he's modeling what he wants the students to do, which is that he's also engaging, taking risks, pushing students, being communicative. Ungrading is not a formulaic way of doing learning. And at the end of the day, you and I have talked about this. Well, I think there are models to doing learning, and I've even participated in areas where we implemented some systems for courses to do learning because we had to produce a lot, and that's a whole nother thing. But like, at the end of the day, learning itself is not actually formulaic. Like, it's a process, and it takes time, and it's different for every person depending on where they're at and their experience and their understanding, and we all have different weaknesses and strengths that we bring to the table. So I like that this model kind of tries to create really a safe playground for students to feel empowered to take risk and push themselves with somebody who can come alongside them and kind of be not that sage on a stage, but a person who shows that they care and is communicating and giving students the feedback they need to understand where they're at. That's, I think, really powerful.
I love it. Thanks again, Tim. I'm excited to continue this series. This is just episode 4, part 4 in this series. So we got one more yet. But I can't wait to get there. So Josh, just take us home.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is next? What's next is Will and I solve all the rest of the problems from ungrading we didn't handle in these 5 episodes. I'm just this last episode, we're going to finish out the ungrading series next week. Will and I just want to talk a little bit from our perspectives. Where do you start with all of this, right? So we've talked about a lot of different things.
Summary, a little bit of new stuff.
Yeah, like why, how to do it. Will and I talked about how to do it in the LMS. And now we've had this incredible conversation from Tim about how to do assessment. But most teachers who haven't done this yet, the question is, where do you start? Like, how do you jump into this? So Will and I kind of want to talk about maybe taking a little bit of inspiration from the idea of like small teaching and simple teaching ideas that I think have permeated into what Will and I do. So we want to talk a little bit about how maybe to apply that to Ungrading. So we're going to be talking about that next week as we finish out the Ungrading series. Again, just a reminder, find us on the socials at High Tech Podcast, Twitter and YouTube. You can find us there. Again, if you're not subscribed to our YouTube, what you doing?
There's a bell.
Come on. Jump on.
Like
if you're watching the video right now, the social media is right down here. It's here. Okay, just use that at
our
High Tech
social.
Podcast. If you're like, I don't understand what you're saying, because I'm just listening to it in audio, come and see our faces.
Come to minute
come join us.
1 hour and 2 seconds of the podcast, and
yeah, we're here. We're gonna make a face right now, and you're not gonna know what it is unless you're watching the video. Yep, we did it. You missed it. So come to YouTube, check it out, subscribe to the High Tech Podcast. Again, if you want to talk to us outside of Twitter, you just want to shoot us an email, you're interested in being on the podcast, you have an app you want to talk about, whatever that may be, you can hit us up at inbox@hightechpod.us and our website, hightechpod.us. You can also get tons of resources for the apps and things that we talk about, as well as information about our guests and things that have been on the podcast. That's all located on our website. Again, thank you for joining us for another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness technology and maybe jettison a grade or two in the classroom or online or in person. See ya.
See ya.